All right, Kevin, back with you for another episode of the $1 Million Relationships Podcast. And today I am here with Chris Catania. Chris, welcome. So awesome to have you today, Chris.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, great to be here.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, you and I were talking before I hit the record button, and you were gracious enough. You're like, Kev, I'm just going to let you know how to pronounce my last name is Catania, like lasagna, and I'm just like, I love that because I will never forget that. Man, I will always remember that. So,
Excellent, excellent.
and
Yeah, just so it just so happens to be one of my favorite foods. So,
they,
sometimes
you know
things
what?
just work out like that.
My wife makes amazing lasagna, so I know that's one of my favorites too.
Awesome. I'm getting
So,
hungry already. Great.
I'm going to start off by just giving a quick shout out to the folks over at the podcastguest.com platform. Man, those guys are doing some amazing work. Without the work that they do, Chris, you and I would have probably not met. And I've met some pretty amazing podcast guests as a result of that. And the bar has been set really high for me as far as they go. And I've and that with the couple the with the research that we've already done on you, and I know you got a new book coming out, and I was just I know I shared with you before we hit the record button. I've really been looking forward to this conversation because you, I know, are somebody who really values relationships, and I just know it's going to be an amazing conversation. And so, what I'd like to do is start off by just turning it over to you, so that we can set some context and give the listeners a little bit idea about who Chris is and what Chris is all about. So why don't we start by letting you share, what you do, who you serve, what inspires you most about the work that you do, and also give us some backstory on how you got into doing what you do.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Kevin, for being here. It's really fantastic what you're doing, and yeah, I think preparing for the podcast was definitely a journey back and kind of figuring out all the relationships. Because when you're building communities, you're right, you're building all of these relationships and really community, and the power of it, is really you can't have it without relationships.
Yeah.
So what I do, I love to help leaders understand the power of community and really understand what community is, often in the context of their business. That can be to help them build relationships, better customer experience, better ways to build relationships with customers. In some cases, I've also helped leaders build better networks and online experiences for employees, for staff retention and improving culture, things like that. I just love the power of community. I've always been very community centric, pretty much my whole life. But what I love to do today is really to help leaders go from whatever mindset they might be having, where they might not be thinking of community, bringing people together for a shared purpose, and then how to take that and embed it into their company and really lead as a as an organization and as a leader with that mindset first, and then the mindset gets right, and then that leads to behaviors, and they're modeling it, and it flows into the customer experience, and then it flows into the internally with the staff experience,
Yeah.
because I think those are having the community first mindset, I think, is really key, because I always believe you can't have really good relationships with customers if the internal piece within the organization is not centered on that. So I love helping leaders get to that threshold, and then not only have that threshold or have that moment of that mindset, but sustain that,
Okay.
because it's really difficult. What I've learned a lot in working with leaders is that there's a lot of pressure to not have a community first mindset or to be community driven. There's a
Mhm.
lot of different market pressures, sometimes peer pressure, different leadership styles, things like that, old management concepts, things like that are still prevalent today. So I've really had the joy and the pleasure of helping leaders go through that, get the mindset, and then allow them to be really enabled by that mindset, community first mindset, to again connect with their customers, build relationships, and I often do that to set some context using online technologies. So
Okay.
many of us are familiar with forums, right? So I've used online platforms, anything from things like social media, or to private platforms that are built on online forums. So there's different ways for the community first mindset and leaders to do that, and I've helped them build that with an online concept. But then what's also equally important is to think of not just the online community sharing and co-creation that's going on, but when everybody gets together, meaning customers get together and doing that at an event and having those relationships flow in person. We all know we still want to get together in person after going through COVID and the pandemic, right? We really want that. So I help leaders maximize the online experience of community building
Uh-huh.
and also the in-person, and really bring those two together so that is a that's a really great combination to do that, because you really can't have one without the other. If you have one and not the other, you're not getting that maximum value. So I help leaders do that for their companies.
Wow. See, and there's so much, what's the right word I'm looking for? There's so much alignment between what you do and what I do that I'm like, man, I knew I was really going to appreciate this conversation today, Chris. And so I'm curious. And I'm totally with you as far as like the virtual and the in-person stuff. I love doing both. And you're right. You can do some really great stuff virtually, and tools like what we're on today, Zoom. I mean, I'll tell you, especially since COVID, I have used Zoom so much, more since 2020 than ever before. And still, I mean, in fact, I host these things I call a virtual roundtable, which is small gatherings for very curated groups of entrepreneurs, like three or four at a time. I've done 350 plus of those since 2020.
Wow,
And
that's great.
so I've become hugely reliant on Zoom. But I also, nothing compares to in person, face to face as well. And so I'm just curious. So when what you talked about helping companies do this, you do this internally for, like, say, their team, their staff members, and all of that, as well as like building communities for the clients, the customers that they have as well. So, and have you done like both kinds of things for a single company and stuff? Okay.
Yeah. When I first started out in my career, I was leveraging online community technology to do that for various brands.
Okay.
And that was the idea that, this concept of community and belonging. So, we're like, as human beings, we're made to be in community with each other. We want to do that. And there's a loneliness epidemic happening right now where,
Totally.
it's been documented, that we've never felt more alone in the history of the human experience, which is ironic because we have so many ways to connect with technology. But there's been, Harvard research, all these different research things going on to say that there's a loneliness epidemic. So when you think about community, one of the important parts of community is the belonging piece. So I've always been really passionate about that, because if, companies can tap into that and know that their customers, who are human beings and people, want to get together with each other, that it is certainly in the company's best interest, just to be a good member of society and member of, participant in the world, let alone the impact this can have for them in the marketplace. But what I've really been passionate about is helping leaders know that they can help facilitate customers coming together to help each other. In some cases, that's helping them solve a technical issue with software products, right? And doing that, or become better people for whatever subject matter expertise, creating communities of practice. So I've done that really at the beginning of my career, and then for a portion of my career, I helped leaders build better culture internally and help large organizations, large enterprises begin to connect, retail experiences with corporate experiences, so that those entities within the organization could collaborate and they feel connected to each other. So it's taking that sense of belonging, sense of community, and idea of belonging, and embedding it into a corporate experience, staff experience, and then also taking that same community sense of belonging and turning it into a competitive advantage in the marketplace. Because if you're a company and you're seen as bringing customers together so they can learn and help each other, then that's kind of the beginning threshold of building, trust
Yeah.
relationships.
Yeah.
Because if a customer is coming into a customer driven community and they're having positive experiences with fellow customers, they're sharing ideas, and they have a sense that their voice is being heard in product development, and then they can come to that community, and if they're a professional that's, you know, maybe not understood at their organization, but they could connect with all these other people who think like them, and feel
Yeah.
that sense of community. Like
Yeah.
that's a great thing for that company to do that, because they're creating long, customer lifetime value. They're creating a long period of trust. And there's been a lot of, B2B, B2C companies, that I've helped build those relationships online, and we do that, and then go ahead and do that at an event and tie all this stuff together. So I just, help them do that, but not only help them because it's the right thing to do, but they're leaders are running businesses, right? And they have to make money and save money essentially with that. So I've helped them, really save millions of dollars in costs, that ordinarily would be fronted by their company. And then on the back end, when you look at customers who are engaged in customer communities, you really see that those that are much more likely to renew, say like software, or be purchase, things like that. So
Yeah.
so all like
Yeah.
so like all this together, I mean, I've always loved community, and I've had my own kind of like what I call my aha moment, where I said, wow, this is amazing. I feel connected. And then I went, from that moment to go, okay, how do we get this into businesses?
Yeah.
How do I help leaders and companies really embed this into into their culture? How do we use community driven concepts and community led concepts, and kind of move away from like an industrial revolution mindset where people are cogs or things like that, because it really is a powerful thing. And I've sat alongside leaders and actually helped them go from have that transformation, and then I've watched the culture and watched their leadership style evolve. So it's really powerful.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, that is. I mean, I can totally see that, and as you're sharing all that, I'm thinking of communities that I've been involved in, and it's just like you're right. It's you feel part of something that's so much bigger than yourself,
Hmm.
and yeah, it is. It's a total game changer. It's a total game changer. Well, okay. So now that we've got some context set, I'm going to reiterate the question for the benefit of the listeners. So, Chris, have you ever been introduced to a person or persons that completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person or persons? And Chris, I was really excited to hear your story and your experience around this topic of relationships.
Yeah, I love that question, Kevin. I was listening to the past episodes where you asked that, and I was like, man, I was listening to you ask that, to other guests, and like my skin was like, I got goosebumps. I'm like, man, who is that? And then one person popped up, and this individual, um, definitely, I would say simultaneously changed the course of my career and also my life,
Okay.
just because, all that community building work that I told you, earlier in my career, I was really excited about it. And you can tell I still am, right? Like I'm still love this
But
stuff.
there's no
And,
hype in that, Chris.
like I'm like, this is powerful stuff. But at the time that I met this individual, I didn't quite understand business necessarily, right? Like I had passion. I had my subject matter expertise was off the charts with like community building. But I was getting introduced to how to do that within the context of an organization, and really to do that in the context of what I call the language of the business.
Okay.
Because a lot of people who do what I do for a living, they really struggle with understanding how to talk about community to leaders, and there's a struggle to help leaders understand um, what community can do for them in the context of the needs and the struggles and the opportunities that they have, and the things that they do, right? So I met this individual, and he was a manager. He was new. He was new to our team, and I got to know him, and he got to know what I did, and it was an amazing relationship because it was both it had mentorship, and it had what you call reverse mentorship,
Okay.
where I was showing him community management. Like, what does that mean? How do you manage a community of, in this case, we were working internally, and how to use it within an organization. So I was saying, oh, here's how you manage a community of large people, because the community that we were managing was about 200,000 staff. So it was large, right? So I was like, well, here's what you do, and here's the different ways you think about it, and here's where get more comfortable with being yourself, even though it may not be, accepted, right? So he was really open to that, and then it happening at the same time, he was coaching me. He was
Okay.
saying, when you're in a meeting, or when you're doing this or doing that, because he would see me present, in front of different leaders, and I wasn't quite hitting it. He could say, you got the passion, you got this, you got that, but tweak this, tweak that, and do this. So I would go back over a series of conversations, a series of meetings, and little by little, I got better and better, at understanding the needs. I got better at. He taught me how to listen, as well, which was something was very, very, very important. I was already, from what I was told, a very good listener. I could kind of read the room, in that sense, and extract things out. But what he did, he gave me some really great and poignant feedback along the way, and it allowed me to understand how to more effectively speak the value of community driven mindset to an organization. And what I was able to do out of that relationship was apply that to all the other leadership moments that I would have. And then, um, no matter if I was speaking to, a CEO, or head of operations, head of marketing, head of legal, head of IT, whatever it was, community impacts all of those areas of the business. And through that relationship that I had, I understood how to lead with their needs, and lead with, their um, you know their you know their challenges,
Yeah.
and then show how community driven mindset and a community driven approach could help them. Because what I was doing before the relationship was, I was leading with all this passion. It wasn't bad, right? But it was just, it wasn't effective. I wasn't having the impact. And 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 this individual, he took me aside over a period of conversations. I think it was like a year or 2 years, where we kind of had this reverse mentorship conversation. And he was like, I just change this. He's like, you got so much passion. You're he called me a visionary. He was like, you're a visionary, but we gotta tweak this a little bit, and things like that. So I really appreciated that. And then I since moved on. He moved on, and then I started to build my own teams, and I started to be, more of a leader, and and do things, for myself. And that leadership moment, and that mentorship, reverse mentorship relationship, influenced my leadership style. So what I ended up doing was combining what he taught me with my already innate, community driven leadership style, and it combined it. And it was just, and that's how I lead today. That's how I lead, and help leaders understand all this stuff. Or if I'm leading a team or a project team, I always think of him. I think of the relationship. I think of what he taught me, and all those different things. But I probably would have been kind of spinning my wheels. I would
Uh-huh.
have been not as effective. And I probably would, the way I'm articulating things now, even in this relationship, or even this conversation, um, is definitely different, because
Yeah.
I can still hear his voice, like in my head, sometimes. And even as I'm working on, I have a book that I'm working on, designed to help leaders. Like, it's influencing that. So I loved your question because it really it took me on that journey. I was like, oh, I think that I certainly would
Yeah,
not be here in doing what I'm doing as effectively as I am doing it now without that relationship.
absolutely. Are you able to share his first name?
James.
James. Okay. And
Yeah.
so when was this? What year was this that this kind of engagement was going on between you and James? Because how long ago was that?
How long ago? I think it's got to be almost 15 years or
Time
so.
flies, doesn't it?
Yeah,
So,
trying to think back to when it actually was, but yeah, it's more than 10. It's more than 10 for sure.
yeah, I can totally relate to what you were talking about and what James was telling you that, Chris, you've got to adjust your messaging, and when you get your messaging right, you'll know it because people are going to engage with you differently. They're gonna lean in, you know. And I've had to go through that same exact process in kind of figuring out how do I explain what I do to the right people so
Hmm.
that they get it in a way that they're like, oh yeah, I could really use somebody like Kevin in my life, you know.
Hmm.
And it sometimes it takes us a little bit of time to just really get that dialed in, and the only way we do that is by having conversations with people, by what you talked about is asking questions and then listening to what they tell us, because they will tell us, they will totally tell us.
Yep.
I mean, I have found a lot of things in working with entrepreneurs, and for me, I have figured out that I am most valuable to, like, already well established entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs that, what I call them, second stage entrepreneurs. They are entrepreneurs who are beyond the point of needing to produce cash flow in their business for sustainability. They've already done that. They're now focused on impact, using their business to make the biggest impact that they can possibly make in the world. That's what they want to do. That's what inspires them. I'm sure, Chris, that's what inspires you.
Mm. Yep.
And so I have learned over time in having conversations with these entrepreneurs, that while they may be very successful, while from the outside looking in, somebody might look at them and go like, wow, they sure do have it all figured out. And sure, they got certain things figured out, but at any given point, they've got very real problems and challenges they're dealing with on a daily basis. And
Absolutely.
because of who they are, it's very valuable for them. One of their best skill sets is solving problems quickly, and
Hmm.
be efficiently. And the faster they do it, it's more valuable to them. And I also know that the more successful an entrepreneur becomes, the smaller their circle of people that they can truly trust and confide in.
Yep.
And that's just the way it is. And it's taken me a long time of just having conversations with these entrepreneurs, and being that conduit of trust for them, and having them share things with me that that just lets me know that kind of stuff. And because I know that, I can speak far more effectively to what they're dealing with. I can empathize with them far more than I could, before. And so this is such a huge thing. So if you look back at this relationship with you and James, and over the last 15 years, and I want you to think, and I'm sure you could come up with tons of examples. I just want you to come up with one. It'll be the first thing that pops up in your mind. If you look back over the years where you had an opportunity, where you made a really substantial impact, and you also know hands down that would have never happened if not for the relationship that you and James have had. What is one example of that?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. There's a lot of them.
Yeah,
That pop up. I would say there was a moment when, I was in a project, and I was tasked with taking a company, in this, they kind of plateaued, in certain ways, and the leadership was split on whether or not, community was the right thing, or what that meant to the different leaders, right? So I was sitting in this room with them, and I was being introduced as the lead to, to kind of help do this from the community side, and how we are going to use online communities to engage customers and product innovation and things like that. And there was this like 50-50 split in the room, when I was introduced, and I was like, wow, that's kind of interesting, and I thought back at that moment, to to my conversations with James,
Okay.
and those things. I was like, okay, because we had talked about, being able to, um, you know, maintain control of your emotions, everything from like facial features to what you would say, making sure you practice. Because I'm a big fan of like practicing, what you're going to say if you know you're going to be in a certain situation. So in that moment, it felt like a movie scene, kind of almost, where things kind of slowed down to 24 frames per second, and then things are like slow motion. And I looked at everybody in the room, and I was like, okay, and I saw who were the champions. I saw who were the, the people who I knew were going to, be my partners, and I saw people who were going to be the skeptics, and I thought back to the conversations, with James, and what he had taught me up until that point. And I was like, okay, well, this is what I'm going to do. And I approached that, and I said, well, okay, everybody, I don't remember exactly what I said, but it was something along the lines of, I'm excited to be here, and I almost, I didn't say the word community in what I said. And that was very intentional, because that was one thing that James and I had talked about, is like, try to talk about community without talking about it. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting, and it's really influenced me, like, in that way. So whatever I said, I don't remember the exact words, but I was like, I'm here to serve your needs, everybody, and I'm excited to work with you. And it's something along the lines of that. And then I had, separate one-on-ones, like anytime, on a new project or joining an organization, or things like that. I love to meet with people and listen to what their needs are, and that happened. And about 2 years later, because this is a long game, right? And I think leaders should understand that community building in any capacity is a long game. Like, it's like a fine meal. You can't microwave it. Just like relationships, it takes time. You have to be invested long term. So that moment happened, and then about 2 or 3 years later, that same room, if I was to get them all together, I think we were in some capacity or whatever, most of the people in that room were champions. And it was because of the different mindset and the different approach that I had. And because I almost didn't want to be known as, just the community guy, right? I wanted to be known as somebody who could use communities to help solve their problems. And that was the mind shift change that James, had really influenced in me, and with that. And that was a big moment, because I was being introduced, as a key influencer and advisor at that point. And I was tasked with not only helping them, with like launching online community, but it was a mind shift change. And there was some trust, that had been broken in the past. So I was also, um, tasked with, though nobody really told me that, I was aware of that. I could sense that there had been some distrust related and associated with the ideas of community. So I was like,
Okay.
okay, we gotta work on that a little bit. So I just leaned on what James taught me, and I was like, well, listen to them, speak their language, understand their language, speak their language again, and do that over a course of time. And that's how you build relationships. That's how you get the trust, because you can't build community without trust, and especially internally, with all the things that leaders are tasked with, so
Yeah.
it was really important. But that's a moment I always remember. And I always had, like, James wasn't in there in the meeting with me physically, but it was like like I was remembering that. And anytime I would go into a meeting with any one of those leaders, or like how do we partner together with this? And that's how I lead leaders today, because how I help them, is understanding that and building that trust and helping them, again, really leverage this stuff, community building, community first mindset in their company.
Yeah. Wow. That is really powerful stuff there. That's really powerful. And, you know, I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation. I was looking forward to this, and now that we've had it, I'm just like, yep, that was really good. That was really good. And for anybody listening to this, Chris, that's like, man, I really like Chris. I like what he stands for. I like the way he shows up. Uh, how can they get more information about what you're doing? Any tools, any websites, any resources that you have to offer?
Yeah. Again, thanks for having me. And everybody can go to, if they're interested in learning more about the book that I'm working on is really designed for leaders. It's called The Community First Company.
Okay.
It's talked about how to sustain, not only launch, but sustain a community-driven mindset within the customer experience and within your culture. You can go to communityfirstcompany.com/free, and you can learn more about the book. Get on the list, to learn when it's coming out. And there's also a free checklist, that leaders can go and download and really do a quick assessment of themselves, where they're at as far as mindset and within their organization. You can also look me up on LinkedIn. I'm always posting updates there, tips and different things, as I continue to talk about, the importance of a community first leadership mindset.
Awesome. 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 Well, Chris, once again, I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation. Any last thing you feel led to share before we call it a wrap?
It's just been fantastic. I mean, I love what you're doing with the show, and I've been inspired by the other episodes. So I just hope everybody's been inspired by this. That the idea that you can build a community first company, even though it takes time, it takes a lot of effort. It is certainly worth it. Both from a bottom line perspective, but also your impact on your company, your organization, the world, the marketplace, like all of that. So if you're a leader listening to this and go, should I do this or should I not? I would say obviously yes. And then there's a lot of tools out there to help you do it, and it's certainly worth it. And thank you for Kevin for bringing me on to have an opportunity to talk about that. Very very appreciative.
All right. Well, thanks again. And yeah, really appreciate it, Chris.